I'm just going to give a brief introduction to Dr. Samantha Matlin, who will be introducing our afternoon's keynote. Samantha is the Director of Community and Learning at the Scattergood Foundation, based here in Philadelphia, and a wonderful partner to the Sozosei Foundation, expressing a lot of gratitude to Scattergood for helping us put today's event on. And so without that, can I welcome Samantha to the podium.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Great to see some familiar faces and new faces. Well, always hard to go after lunch, where I myself ate too much pasta salad, but loved it. Want to thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to be here. And for those of you who are joining us from outside of Philadelphia, welcome. We're so honored to have you and have you in such a beautiful setting. So I am not Joe Pyle. I know I look exactly like Joe Pyle. I have the pleasure of working with Joe Pyle at the Scattergood Foundation, and we're really excited to have Larry Krasner here today, which is a really important piece of this discussion and how we interface with the criminal justice system and what we need to do to really shift away from the criminal justice system being our treatment facility for behavioral health. And so we now know that with community mental health and deinstitutionalization, transitioning people's care to being homeless and experiencing homelessness to being in prisons where they're accessing treatment, this is not what we want for the future. And so what we really need to be thinking about is how do we imagine a different kind of system? How do we think in a different way? What kind of policies and procedures? Because we know we get the systems that we intend to build, right? So right now we have a racist system. That's not by accident, right? The structural inequities that exist in our world didn't just happen to be. So I'm really excited to introduce a disruptive leader here in our hometown in Philadelphia. I'm not from Philadelphia, so I can't say that it's my hometown, but I live here. And so I'm so excited to introduce Larry Krasner. We share his middle name, my first name, so I feel like a kindred spirit now. But so excited to hear what he has to say. So thank you so much.
Well, first of all, thank you for allowing me to be here. I know I'm going to say something stupid because that's one of the things I do. So please give me a little grace in case I use the wrong term or express myself in the wrong way or leave something out, because believe it or not, once in a while I do that. I want to tell you something about Homeboy Industries, a guy called Dinosaur Man. I got your attention. And then I'm going to bore you with some data, but I think it matters. And of course, we're going to have some questions at the end. So I was recently in Los Angeles for a gathering of prosecutors who describe themselves as reform prosecutors or progressive prosecutors. And for those of you who are not aware, prosecutors have the job of handling criminal cases that are generally brought to them by police or other law enforcement within a particular jurisdiction. We decide whether to charge or not. We decide whether to pursue a conviction or not, whether to divert a case. We decide what should be done with a particular juvenile. Should that person be in juvenile court or adult court? Obviously, there is always the voice of the defense attorney, a job I had for 30 years before I became chief prosecutor here. And there is a decision by a judge, a job that my wife had for 19 years before starting her mediation company that she runs right now. But we make decisions that are monumental, frankly. Some of those decisions include things like whether to pursue the execution of a human being. That's a pretty big decision. And we make decisions that at times no president of the United States, no U.S. senator has the power to make. It is perhaps too powerful in some people's minds, and it also, in my opinion, has been done the wrong way for a very long time. I say that as someone who came out of law school in 1987. I have been in the world of criminal justice my entire career, which is now about 34 years, and so I picked up a couple of opinions. When I was recently in Los Angeles, I was walking through LAX. I had just heard from Father Greg Boyle For those of you who do not know who he is, Father Greg Boyle is a somewhat legendary figure in Los Angeles, having spent 35 years working with gang members. And there are and have been a lot of gangs in LA and a lot of gang violence. Things are better now in some ways. I'm not saying that crime is better. There are very serious challenges with crime all over the country. But what I am saying is that if we are to believe Father Boyle, and I believe people who are fathers, if we are to believe him, then the number of gang-related homicides was cut in half during those 35 years, and then it was cut in half again. The nature of his work is undoubtedly challenging. On the day when I heard him speak, he was doing his 253rd funeral for people he had worked with over those 35 years. That's about 7 a year, something like that. But his organization has engaged thousands and thousands and thousands of gang members who walked in the door voluntarily and engaged with his organization for 18 months. That organization does a lot of things. It has the ability to remove gang tattoos. It is known as Homeboy Industries because there's work, there's job training. And this all occurred to me as I'm walking through LAX because I looked up, and the most beautiful food vendor in LAX in the terminal where I was Homeboy Bakery, which made Starbucks look like nothing. Trust me. The array of baked goods, the beauty of the space itself, the long line that was too long for me to even get in it because I was going to miss my plane, said something about what was going on there. More to the point, if you listen to what Father Greg Boyle has to say about this, he says some things that I think are of note for this gathering, and some things that reminded me of Dinosaur Man. We'll get to that. One of the things that he said was that people who have hope do not join gangs. He also said that people who have never been soothed don't know how to soothe themselves. And he was speaking of the volatility, the hot-headedness, the response to a challenge with immediate violence that is common among gang members. He was also talking about the draw that gangs have for people. And he said, it's a man who's pretty interesting in his word choice, he said that most of them are coming from parents who were either frightening or frightened, which I thought was also pretty interesting. So what they do during these 18 months of engagement is not just job training. It's not just removing tattoos if that's what you want. It goes deeper than that. It goes to issues of healing. At a moment when we are in a national gun violence crisis that we see everywhere, we have at this point at least 12 cities that have set all-time records for homicides. Don't be surprised if that number is 15 or 20 or 25 by the time we hit January the 1st. At a moment when last year the increase in gun violence was 42% among the 50 largest cities, and the increase this year we have yet to see, but it will be big. The last article I saw was about 30%. We cannot ignore the role of mental health when we look at that violence, especially as we see this very complicated situation where the data, I'm not speaking of the experience because the experience is horrible, but the data shows this tremendous spike in gun violence happening essentially all over the country, including in cornfields, essentially all over the country, and yet you don't see what you ordinarily see, which is these other metrics of crime in general, these other metrics of certain other violent crimes that don't involve a gun are not following that trend, which is almost always the pattern. We cannot separate out mental health and mental illness from our national and local gun violence crisis. We absolutely have to look at this if we are to do anything better than what we have done in the past. We'll get to Dinosaur Man in a second. If we're going to be honest about this, the truth is that what people elected to positions like the one I'm in have done for the last 40 years, which is the period of the rise of mass incarceration in the United States, is punish. The system has been about punishment. It has not been about rehabilitation. It has not been successful. Let's all take a trip to modern Germany. You will find in modern Germany that they have 1/9 the level of incarceration. They have 1/9 the level of homicide. What? I thought we had to lock everybody up to be safe. How did that happen? Well, they are more in tune with trying to get at the root causes of violence. Yes, they have some other advantages, like they didn't end up with more guns than human beings in a society with a history that is, frankly, hyper-violent and soaked in blood. Germany has its legacy. They have, in some respects, they have national health insurance. But let me tell you just for a second what it's like to walk into at least some jails in Berlin, because I have done that, and I did it before the pandemic. So you walk into a jail in Berlin, there's a bunch of little lockers, and this is not all of them, but certainly some of them. Those lockers are for keys to cars. Those cars are in the parking lot. Those cars belong to inmates, many of whom will drive that car home to have dinner with their families, to reconnect with their families and hang on to that bond which we know is so protective and so likely to turn them away from crime. And then they drive back to the jail for the night. And then they sleep in the jail the night, and they're in the jail the next day. And what do they do the next day? Well, first of all, they don't live in cages. They live in close quarters that look kind of like a cruise liner. Second, most of them in a system where there's a very high level of immigrants who do not necessarily speak German. Most of them will spend their days as follows: doing industrial work for which they will be paid close to the wage they would make on the street. Why? Because the system has embraced the idea that human dignity is essential. After having gone the opposite direction in World War II, they've embraced the idea that human dignity is essential. And they have embraced the idea that the purpose of custody is not to punish. The purpose of custody, as they use it, this is their word, is to reintegrate people into society so they won't come back. So what else do? They teach you German 1. They teach you German 2. And they pay you just as much to go to German 1 and German 2 as they pay you to do industrial work. What do we do in the United States? We let you sew prison shoes that look like they belonged on your feet in 1905 for about 3 cents an hour. That's what we do. So guess what? When you actually equip people to enter an economy in a better position than they were when they went into custody, they don't come back. They're doing something right there. We're doing some things wrong. Yes, there's other differences having to do with the availability of health insurance. But we have to look at that when we look at what's going on. Before I became DA, I spent more than a year of my life going in and out of jails and prisons because I represented literally thousands, probably more than 10,000 clients, many of whom were incarcerated. I got to hear their life stories. Some of the stories were completely true, some of them were not. But it shined a light on what was going on. And simply seeing what was happening, and mostly not happening, in those jails and prisons also shined a light on what was going on. I remember a particular client I had, the one I called Dinosaur Man, who also, I think, sensitized me to these issues. I received a call from a man in Florida about his brother. His brother had been in local county custody in Philadelphia. This is back when I was a defense attorney, for about a year. I was being hired about a year after this man went to custody. He was charged with aggravated assault on 2 or 3 police officers, and he had been found incompetent to stand trial 3 different times, meaning psychologists, psychiatrists had analyzed him and found that he didn't even have the awareness of what it meant to defend against charges, to be able to work with an attorney, to understand the significance of the proceedings. He couldn't go to trial. And then I found out that that wasn't going to change. His history, Dinosaur Man's history, was that he had grown up in the South. He was, I don't know the right word, and here's where I get in trouble, but he lacked capacity to the extent that he had been tested with an IQ that was in the 40s. He had not been educated in a public or private school system at all. He was now about 60 years of age, and he believed he was a dinosaur. That's what he told me. So I went up to go see this gentleman, and I was taken to the mental health wing of local custody. And as I approached what was actually a more humane circumstance to talk than most, which was an open table where I could sit with him, I heard him growling in kind of a low growl. I got closer. I sat down. We spoke. I told him, His brother had sent me. I explained that I was an attorney. I was a defense attorney. I was trying to figure out whether there was something better to do than for him to sit in county custody forever, because there was no placement for him, and that's why he had been sitting there for a year. And eventually he explained to me what had happened. What actually had happened is he was in front of some kind of a public school. He was agitated. He picked up some sort of a pipe or stick. He started banging on a security box of some sort. Police arrived, and he resisted. And at the end of that resistance, he was badly beaten. His nose was broken. His cheekbones, if I recall correctly, one of them had been fractured. And he was charged with aggravated assault on the police who had come there to deal with him. But the way he explained it to me was that he was Tyrannosaurus Rex, and he had been attacked by King Kong. And he acted all of this out for me. We then sat down, and we had a little dispute because he claimed I was Stegosaurus. And I felt that I needed to be in a position to advise him. I needed to be a dinosaur he would respect, because ultimately I was going to have him do things in court to try to get him to a better place. So we had a little dispute. I actually contended that no, indeed, I was Tyrannosaurus Rex. I was not Stegosaurus. I was not a plant eater. I was a meat eater. And we went through that whole thing, right? The story eventually ended a little bit better than it might, because facilities were better in Florida than we were here. And God bless his brother who came up and hypothetically might have administered a few sleeping pills, put him on Amtrak, because the idea of putting him on an airplane was not a good idea. And he apparently slept most of the way to Florida, where he got the kind of facilities that, for whatever reason, Philadelphia completely lacks. That's disgusting. I mean, that is a disgusting situation. You have someone in a jail cell who's never, ever going to be able to go to trial for a year, who's in need of placement, support, help, who is suffering very, very significant impairments, whose needs have not been answered by a public school system, have not been answered by law enforcement responding to a situation and misapprehending what was actually going on here. And then the court system is not responding to him at all. There was no treatment. There was no help happening within that jail at that time. Well, that is unacceptable, but unfortunately, what happened to Dinosaur Man is also a little too typical. And now I want to give you a couple stats, because I think they are pertinent to what we're talking about. 2 out of 5 incarcerated people have a history of mental illness. This includes 37% in state and federal facilities and 44% in local jails. If you're wondering why that might be, local jails tend to hold people for shorter periods of time. So the kinds of sort of low-level misdemeanor offenses that we tend to see often correlate with substance abuse, trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, service in the military, addiction, etc. 66% of women in prison report having a history of mental illness, which is nearly twice the percentage of males. Now, understand, in the United States, approximately 90% of the people who are in custody are men. I would love to hear someone much more expert than me explain exactly why that is, but clearly it's happening. Suicide is the leading cause of death for people incarcerated in local jails, and it is not getting better during the pandemic. It is getting worse. Talk about youth. 70% of system-involved youth have a, quote, diagnosable mental health condition, unquote. Veterans, of the approximately 50,000 military veterans currently incarcerated in local jails, over half are experiencing mental illness. I have actually dealt with veterans in 2 different capacities, once as a defense attorney. The level at which they experience issues of addiction, mental health issues, post-traumatic stress disorder is exceedingly high. I am happy to report that in Philadelphia, like some other jurisdictions, we do have a veterans court. And a big part of what that veterans court does is it tries to get at the root causes of what the issues are. Some of it is mentoring by other veterans. Some of it is appropriate treatment of different types. They do a pretty good job. And we are proud to be a part of that and have that be a permanent fixture within our court system. But make no mistake, the trauma that is inflicted upon soldiers is very, very real. and often trauma inflicted upon them before they become soldiers is very, very real. And their options are therefore limited, and that is why some of them choose a job that basically involves endangering their lives. Access to care. While the criminal justice system acts as a proxy for inadequate societal mental health and social service supports, only 45% of people incarcerated in local jails receive mental health treatment. That number increases to 63% for people incarcerated in state and federal facilities. To some extent, that's an issue of resources. To some extent, it's an issue of the reality that people in federal and state facilities are doing more time. And for the safety of the correctional officers, if for no other reason, and there are other very good reasons, it is more of a priority to have treatment. People who are reentering society after incarceration who have some level of health coverage are also more likely to access services that reduce recidivism. So, according to a 2-year study conducted in King County, Washington, and for those of you who don't know, that's Seattle area, and Pinellas County, Florida, Medicaid coverage and behavioral health supports for people suffering from severe mental illness reduced recidivism by 16%. Holy cow! You mean when we actually go after the causes of criminal behavior, we can reduce criminal behavior instead of just punishing the crap out of it? Go figure. My goodness, it almost sounds scientific. It almost sounds like the law is sort of kind of trying to catch up to medicine, doesn't it? What an amazing thought. We would try to fix the problem. Well, when you do it, it works. It works a whole lot better than punish, 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 and when you're done punishing, punish. Another Washington State study concluded that impoverished adults suffering from substance use disorder undergoing state-funded treatment were 18% less likely to recidivate. So, there are some needs that we have in Philadelphia. I think they probably apply elsewhere. But I do want to take a minute. We have 8 minutes. I'll make sure I stop with at least 5 to go. I want to take a minute to talk about another place where something works. In my opinion, in my mind, the most successful drug treatment effort in the history of the world is what was done in Portugal, specifically starting in Lisbon, over the past 22 years. I'm going to try to get to that very specifically, but the results are this. Over that 20 or 21, 22-year period, Lisbon went from having 5,000 on-street heroin users, meaning people living on the street, dying on the street, dining on the street, buying drugs on the street, 5,000 to 1,000 in 20 years. That is an 80% reduction in the on-street opioid addiction in that society. And they got there by decriminalizing the possession and use. Not the sales, they still prosecute that all day long, but decriminalizing the possession and the use of opioids, taking it completely out of the criminal justice system and putting it into a civil system where they basically don't have lawyers or judges. They have people who offer voluntary services. Portugal has gone back and forth between right-wing and left-wing administrations. You know what they never do? They never stop doing this. Because it works. Because it works. Once again, I was in Lisbon. I had the opportunity to be there, had the opportunity to meet the doctor, yes, I said doctor, who started this program. It wasn't started within the legal profession. And the bottom line is, if you get busted with an amount of drugs that is considered a user amount, they send you through what is essentially a summons. They don't lock you up, they don't cuff you, they don't put you in a jail cell. They send you to a room where you're going to meet with some people who know all about services. And they're going to first figure out, are you suffering from addiction or are you a recreational user? Either way, they will offer you and recommend some kinds of services. And what they find is that the only people who utilize the services are the ones who want it. They're not being forced to do it, which is pretty damn ineffective. It's the ones who want it. So this means guy may get he may get stopped 2, 3, 4 times. Go there, shrug it off, keep moving, but that 4th or 5th time, it might start to take. They've found out about services, they've been connected to those services, and the results speak for themselves. By not making it a criminal justice issue, the issue of substance abuse, which I think everybody here would probably agree is generally regarded as a coping mechanism for other underlying problems. By trying to go at the underlying problems and making it voluntary, not coercive, but voluntary, they got rid of 80% of the on-street opioid addiction. How are we doing in Kensington? Anybody been to Kensington lately? We're not doing so well. And yet, the hue and cry that we hear over and over and over is the same old one. Lock them up. Lock them all up. Lock them up for longer. We can't have them on his corner. Put them in a jail cell. It doesn't work. That is the bottom line. So I'm very grateful you gave me the chance to talk to you and tell you all about Homeboy Industries and Dinosaur Man and Portugal and Berlin and stuff that actually works. And I hope to have some friendly questions. Are we sitting or standing? Whatever you want.
Let's hang out.
Okay.
I mean, you're coming back from California. You're like, chill now. I just want to say these drawings are amazing. So I'm listening to you, but just, it's amazing. Thank you for not drawing me, but he looks great. So, I think in behavioral health, we recognize now that we're not going to treat ourselves out of this. We do not have a workforce, and nor do people want to be treated in the way that we are providing our care right now. And we're not going to arrest ourselves out of this. So we really have to be thinking in a different way. And I'm really glad that you've opened our eyes to some different ways to thinking about that. And I want to go back to something that you talked about in a number of settings, which is the importance of work and dignity and respect. Now, I personally don't know what I would do without work. I mean, it'd be nice for like a little bit, Joe, no ideas, but it'd be like nice, like, oh, I can hang out. But what would I do? My sense of purpose, yes, I'm a mom, I love my kids, but I'm not great at the baking muffins all day. So we think about that. Since the age of 15, I have had a job that I get to choose how I spend my money. I get to choose what kind of job I have, what setting I want to be in. Not retail. I learned from friends that's not a good choice. So when we take people and say, you're not ready to work, you're too sick to work, you need to go to treatment before you work, you know what, you're being punished so you can't work, what does that mean for our dignity? So when we think about getting to root causes, what would that mean to help someone get a job and not talk to them about their depression? If we focus on people's symptoms, then that's all it becomes. But when we have a goal and a purpose, we can do something different. So I'd love to open it up to friendly questions. You did a great job. And I think if anything in the pandemic has taught us is that we need to treat everyone, ourselves included, with a little bit of grace. Nobody is perfect, and we're all doing our best. And so I'd love to open it up to questions. I'll be looking at our virtual audience as well, since the technology in here, superb. And we'll just have you speak into the microphone just for our virtual attendees.
Hi, it's so good to see you, D.A. Krasner. I voted for you, and I wanted to thank you. I think that you've done some very progressive things in the city. I think you're visionary, and that I like. And you also have a very hard job. But my name is Amani. I am a unit assistant within the Miracles Progress Program in North Philadelphia Health System. I work with unhoused men who were challenged by substance abuse and mental health challenges. Most of them have been impacted by trauma. You are absolutely right. Untreated trauma in childhood creates a chaotic adult. Sometimes trauma can lead to mental health challenges, and most of them are masking some uneventful things that happen to them in their life. My question to you is that I look at Kensington and I'm saddened, and I used to live in that, in that area. I don't, as a clinical assistant, we get the people that come off the streets, but we also have a problem with recidivism. They come in, they come out. The program I work in, they can, if they go out, they can come back in again. We don't judge them. They can come back as many times as they want, as long as they don't bring drugs on the unit or fight. Because our program was specifically designed for the hard-to-reach people that are out there in the streets, particularly in the Kensington section. I'm not sure how we're going to deal with that in the city or how you're going to deal with that. But at some point, what does your office do to help people? And I'm familiar with the mental health court because we have it at my job. Mm-hmm. What else do you think we can do to reduce recidivism? Because I heard the model that you use in Portugal, but for some reason, in the city of Philadelphia, it's very easy to get street drugs. I'm finding that younger and younger children are experimenting with drugs, not opiates, but a lot of the younger people mess with wet. What do you suggest we do? I know we can't reach the adults because some of them use them. How do you suggest we reach younger populations who are thinking or experimenting or being introduced to opiates? That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Such a great question, such a huge topic. And I know we don't have a ton of time. I think it takes a very holistic approach. But I will tell you, when I was in Portugal, in Lisbon, I actually went out with an outreach team. And one of the things that really struck me is that almost all of the unhoused people suffering from addiction there were older. They were almost all people who either had were in their 40s or in their 50s. Many of them were people who actually were in relapse. They had come off of the opioids. One of them had a brain tumor, and he was using it. He was relapsing in connection with that. One of them had lost someone in his family and lost his job, and he was using in connection with that. I was absolutely struck by how few young people were out there. I don't have a perfect answer for you. I mean, if I could wave a magic wand, and prosecutors have a very narrow lane, but if I could wave a magic wand, I would try to look at some stuff that worked. National health insurance works. Having zero barriers to getting treatment whenever you are ready for it works. Legalizing marijuana for adult use provides marijuana as a step-down option, and there have been a lot of treatment programs that are actually have been successful for both alcohol and opioids that involve stepping down, taking a harm reduction approach, where the attitude is that if we make it better, that's better than if we don't. Not every single thing is about complete abstinence. If complete abstinence is the obstacle to people doing better, then one size doesn't fit all. For some, abstinence will be the answer. But for other people, the reduction of use, the normalization of life, being able to reconnect with family and work, that sort of thing can be very stabilizing. And I'll tell you, one of the things that they very heavily emphasized there, which I thought was fascinating, was housing. A lot of the people who were really suffering from addiction to substances, mental health, when they had housing, stopped using, or they reduced it an awful lot. You know, this is a phenomenon they sometimes talk about with Vietnam War. The circumstances of being a soldier in the Vietnam War were so awful that opioid use was widespread. And yet, when a lot of those people who were using opioids on a regular basis as soldiers in Vietnam returned to the United States, where they didn't have this sense of dying at any given moment, where they weren't, bathed in blood and surrounded by horror, when they came back to the United States and the circumstances were better, they just stopped using. They didn't actually require a whole bunch of treatment or anything of that sort. They no longer were numbing themselves against the reality of their existence. And I would suggest to you that perhaps there's a connection between what we saw post-Vietnam War and what you see when people who are living on the streets for 9 consecutive years are given housing. I mean, the truth is, most of these answers actually have to do with making sure people can have their basic needs met. And that's not something this country has done terribly well.
So, I think thinking about the social determinants of health and what people are going back to is really important when we think about recidivism. What are people's options and choices? And so we have one more question, and then we'll...
DA Krasner, thank you very much for what you just shared with us. And you started out by saying people need hope. And it looks like I'm very familiar with the work of Father Greg Boyle in Homeboy Industries and what he's doing but for you to take the time to go and visit with him and then walk the halls there in the jails in Germany and to then go to Lisbon and that work, that's an appetite for change. Where are we in terms of the leadership for the change? Are there some things that you're scaling as a result of your trips here? And what can we see in terms of our hope for change for our communities? Because we know our community needs help, not handcuffs. Thank you.
Thank you for that. What a great question. So I can't take credit for having some kind of vision to go all those places. There is a national movement for criminal justice reform that is, frankly, exploding in a good way. People don't realize this, but 2 years ago, about 10% of the United States had elected a reform prosecutor. The number now is 20.1%. In 2 years, around George Floyd, we went from about 35 million Americans elected a progressive or reform prosecutor. It's now 70 to 75 million people, including the biggest criminal justice jurisdiction in the United States, which is Los Angeles County, and many big cities. The influence is even bigger than 20% because these are big cities mostly, they handle an outsized portion of all the criminal cases. So the influence might be more like 30%. And that is good news. But the idea to go to those places was not mine. The funding did not come from my pocket or taxpayers. That came from an organization that you should know about, because there's a ton of leadership in this room, and all real change is going to happen at the level of culture. I can talk to you all day long, and we can high-five each other, but that's not going to change anything. What's going to change something is when the public gets it. They hear about it, and they want it. And then they start to make their elected officials do what they want. The organization I'm talking about is called FJP. That is Fair and Just Prosecution. Fair and Just Prosecution it's really national, but its main leader, who is a woman named Miriam Krinsky, former federal prosecutor who ran a children's organization in Los Angeles and has been in criminal justice her whole career. Miriam Krinsky runs FJP, Fair and Just Prosecution. Yes, you can find the website. Yes, you can get the information. It's essentially the clubhouse for the reform prosecutors in the United States, and you can't get in unless you're actually doing something that is reformy, okay? And you might just get thrown out if you don't do something that is reformy. But, they act as a clearinghouse. This is a reasonably well-funded organization. They act as a clearinghouse of information. They do work all over the country. They try to bring best practices to prosecutors and learn from prosecutors to provide best practices. That's why I was in a jail in Berlin. That's why I was in Lisbon, sitting down with the doctor who invented what they're doing with opioids there. This community needs to connect with them. Now, Miriam's going to kill me because I just put her out there, and some of you will actually follow up. But she's only going to kill me for a minute, then she's going to be happy, because what you are going to do, I hope, is as leaders within your own circles, and all of you have circles of influence, important circles of influence. As you connect to that, and you bring ideas to that, and they bring resources and ideas to you, this can become an ongoing discussion all over the country, and as soon as it is something that people start to latch onto, in the same way that they have made clear that they want to change in how prosecution is done, they are going to make clear that they want to change in how the criminal justice system connects to mental health issues. So seriously, this ain't about me. This is actually about you. This is actually about your activity.
So with that, I'd say we have our charge. I want to thank you again for taking time from your schedule to join us, and let's do another round of applause.
Can I get a photo of that?
Yeah, you get a picture with that.
Thank you very much. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Really appreciate those words and the inspiring thoughtfulness about the important role that the prosecutor's office plays in the decriminalization of mental illness